So hi, and welcome to another Tech Command Investing podcast where technology meets leadership. I'm Alain Gavin, Managing Partner at Scion Partners and Venture Partner at Carista. In this show, we're going to explore how, quite literally, we zoom in on thermal intelligence from space. My guest is Dr. Max Gulde, CEO and co-founder of constellr. And he's building a company with a global network of thermal infrared satellites designed to measure the Earth's surface temperature with unprecedented precision. Their mission is to monitor the planet's vital signs from water, stress, and crop health to energy efficiency, urban heat dynamics, and even battlefield awareness, which is new this year, for you. That's correct. constellr sits at the intersection of climate resilience on the one side, and on the other side, strategic defense. Two worlds converging fast, as you know, and in your startup is converging really fast. It is. As governments and investors alike recognize the temperature is now a key variable, not only for sustainability, but also for sovereignty and security. You have 2 satellites in orbit, in LEO orbit already, a third on the way. Max and his team are turning space-based thermal data into actionable intelligence for ministries, city planners, defense agencies alike. At this point, I just wanted to mention again that constellr is an investment that we made out of Carista's Tech One fund, also known as Cosmic Capital, and a fund that's focused on Europe's most promising dual-use space, defense, and security technologies. In this episode, we'll explore how constellr is redefining thermal imaging for agriculture, energy, urban resilience, why temperature intelligence is becoming a core component of national defense strategy, and where the fusion of artificial intelligence and space analytics is heading as we approach 2027. I'm not sure if you're aware of this paper on 2027, AI is going to take over the world. That's where that number comes from. So this is where we talk to LPs, sovereign fund executives, and you'll be talking to quite a few over here, or policymakers focused on dual-use innovation, or just someone interested in the space. Stay with us. This is Tech Command Investing, and this is constellr. So let's just dive into it. First question about vision and your origin story. What problem did you set out to solve with constellr? And why is temperature the master variable for food, water, urban resilience, and increasingly defense at a time when there are exponentially increasing global defense budgets?
Okay, so quite a lot of questions. So first of all, Ellen, thanks for having me here. We know each other for quite some time. So happy to be part of your podcast. So maybe very briefly about me, for those who don't know me, I'm Max. I'm 41, married, have 4 kids. I'm living just south out of Munich. And when I'm not building a company, I'm usually trying to be outdoors. By training, I'm a physicist. So I spent more than a decade in academia. I built electron microscopes, actually the first microscope who looked at one of the first microscopes who looked at atoms moving in real time. So we built a 1 trillion frame camera. That was cool and exciting, but also to not well aligned with what I actually wanted to do. So the vision I had for myself was to leave a kink in human history, ideally a positive one. So the origin story is a little bit that after the postdoc, I thought, okay, what are the technologies which will matter most? And this was in the early 2010s for the next couple of years, for let's say 20 years, and where I would be happy to invest myself for that amount of time. And the outcome was that, well, climate change is the big thing we need to tackle. So the things we see right now, I would say, are a blip, and we need to create systems which can help solve that blip, but also have a longer term vision. For me, 3 technologies came in mind back then. Maybe I was a bit naive there. It was everything around space, because we need an outside picture of our planet. Everything around, back then I would have called it rather big data than AI, because there's a lot of data which need to be crunched, and that's definitely not happening with just people sitting there crunching those numbers. And we need to massively correlate insights from different areas. And the third one is, well, if you look at substantial mass execution on the planet, on a unprecedented scale, we probably need to look into automation robotics. I had the advantage of having no clue about any of these fields. So I could come in with new ideas, but also a ton of naivety. I started working at Fraunhofer. I worked there in total for 7 years. I invented a lot of very useless stuff, but some useful things. That's where I met my co-founders, Maris, who's an aerospace engineer, and Chris, who's a business background. And together we then came up with the idea of constellr, because we saw there's a clear need. The need initially started with us. We want to have such data and just didn't exist. We then defined how to, well, first we actually looked for this data. After getting a bit of a grip on the Earth observation market, was like, okay, it just doesn't exist, at least not in a way which is fit for purpose. And we saw so many applications across different domains, and we said, okay, we need to do something. So the vision relatively early became to create and let's overuse that word, but to create a digital twin, a real-time health monitor of the entire planet. And complement the existing view of that planet with the activity layer. So what do I mean by this? If you look at Earth observation, you have the existing, which about 80% of the market is usually high-resolution visual data. And what do you do with this? You do feature detection, right?
Yes.
You connect, that's a car, that's a plane, that is whatever it is. So it works very similar to our own eyes. We detect features and we categorize these features.
Yes.
There's a second part, which is about 19% of the market and growing right now because of the use in defense. And that's geometry information. So synthetic aperture radar or SAR. And here you basically bounce back radio waves and you look at the reflected signal and you say, okay, now we have geometry information. So you have the features, you have geometry, but what you don't have is activity. So what thermal gives you is the activity layer. So assume, for example, you have a power plant.
Yeah.
So you can categorize this as a power plant because you see, okay, it has all the features, the reactor, the cooling circuits, and so on and so forth. You can see the structural damage if you look at the geometry over time. But do you know if it's on or not if you don't see a clue? No. We can tell you exactly with thermal intelligence which of the reactors are on, if the cooling circuit is intact or not, and all these information. If you look at, let's go into defense, if you look at a border region and you see patterns of life, and let's say you see an inflatable tank, who tells you if that's inflatable or a real tank? Well, the real tank probably has an engine, so it gives up a thermal signature, and that's something we can detect. And let's go to agriculture. In agriculture, you can see if a field is green or not green, but that's basically just the photosynthetic activity or the amount of chlorophyll in the plants. It's not telling you if the plant is actually healthy, which is a function of, are the stomata closed, are they opened, is the exchange with CO2 and water with the atmosphere or not. And these things, again, you can see in the thermal domain. You can basically see the plant is stressed or not stressed, has a fever or not.
Yeah.
So we're complementing existing systems with this temperature/activity layer. And that's where intelligence comes from. And this is what's currently missing and what is really thought after by not only industry, but also the government.
Yeah, and going into that, trying to position yourself and differentiate yourself in the market. In a world with upcoming public missions like the European Space Agency's Land Surface Temperature Monitor satellite and the French CNES or Space Agency, and also the Indian Space Agency's Thermal Infrared Imaging Satellite for high-resolution natural resource assessment, Trishna, alongside other fast-moving commercial peers. What's constellr's unique lane there?
Yes. So it is speed and accuracy. If you do look at what the core requirements and characteristics are, or performance indicators, thermal is slightly different than existing assets. So let me dive into that and break this down. So usually what you look at first is what's the resolution, right? And that makes sense, right? For visual data, for SAR data, it does make sense. To a certain extent, it does make sense for thermal, but thermal patterns might not change on the same scales as visual, right? So do I need 1 centimeter resolution to detect if it's a car, if the engine is on or not? Probably not. And if you go to agriculture, or let's say if you go to an industrial complex, you don't need that type of resolution. So resolution is still important, but there's a threshold depending on the use case.
Which becomes relevant.
Exactly, beyond which it becomes relevant. Exactly. There's frequency, same as for the other modes, because you want to track things over time. Now, the important thing is with frequency, if you want to track things over time, so you need to be able to compare today with yesterday, tomorrow, or in a few hours from now. So how do you do this? Because now you're not looking at a feature which is moving over time, but you're looking at a physical measurement. So you need to know that the measurement you today is repeatable and is close to the ground truth. So that is precision and accuracy. And if, let's say, the color of the car is slightly greener or less orange or whatever, and you just want to track this car, it doesn't really matter.
Exactly.
But suddenly accuracy in the thermal domain becomes highly important. I would claim it is the most important characteristics of the signal because it allows you to look at time series. And then the last one is latency. So how fast do you get this information? That again is very similar to the existing sectors. So the first unique selling point in terms of where we differentiate from all the existing peers on the market is in terms of accuracy. So accuracy is achieved by having, let's say, good algorithms to achieve that. And for us, they are patented and exclusively licensed to constellr, and yada yada, all good. But it also allows us to redefine how we set up the hardware. And the hardware, in this case, you need cryo-cooled sensors because otherwise you have no control of all let's say, all the noise, and need a thermally stabilized optical chain. And again, we're the only ones who had that. There are other subtleties like you need to be multiband, you need a certain spectral range, and so on and so forth. I'm not going into detail there. But the point is that the technology, that the combination of technologies developed from the hardware as well as the software side, they need each other. So the software allows us to have a certain hardware configuration, which has a similar performance as existing, let's say, military systems, but at less than 1% of the cost. And the hardware, together with that software, allows us to achieve the accuracy we need. If you only have one, it doesn't work. So the hardware alone doesn't work because you need the software to do the proper processing. The software line doesn't work because it only works together with a certain hardware configuration. So there, in this sense, we're unique. Coming to the public missions. What we are building right now is a resilient system of a confederated constellation we give access to. And we will replenish this constellation over and over and over again. So if you work with us, you will always have the highest resolution, highest frequency, best latency, and best accuracy. If you work with the traditional players where it takes between 7 and 10 years to plan a system, by the time it is launched, it's already outdated and it is massively costly. And then it works for 5 to 7 years and need a new system. Imagine you get access immediately. Imagine you have a system which is automatically getting better over time. So every year we're going to launch a new generation with high resolution and so on and so forth, all this thing. So it's a very different game. And I believe that compared to the public missions, which are great because they deliver a really good base data set and they also have high accuracy, but we already in specs higher performance than all these public missions which come in the next 2 to 7 years. And they're not yet secure. The budget is not there yet for all these missions. So this, I think, puts us in a nice position that we're cooperating with the respective government bodies to support these missions, to support their data processing. We are a precursor mission to that.
And you might even feed some of the data into your data sets. Yeah,
absolutely. So for us, it's a good thing they come, but by the time they arrive, we'll be between 1 and 2 orders of magnitude higher in performance.
I understand. Yeah. So then moving on to the next maybe section of this podcast about why this matters for investors. What's the state of play right now? You have 2 satellites in orbit, 1 in preparation for launch. What are today's paying use cases, average deal sizes, time to value you're seeing with ministries, agricultural systems, integrators, or city authorities? What's happening in that field?
So right now, most of the revenue is still commercially or civil government. That is as of today. What we're seeing, Germany just announced 35 billion in space budget, whereas I think about 30 to 40% will probably be allocated in 2026 already. And so what we see is a gigantic push towards sovereignty, towards less dependence on assets, in particular US assets. And here, this will be the defining market for the next, I would say, 5 to 10 years. And we're riding that wave. So we're talking on a daily basis now to various governments and how we can support them in their own, let's say, sovereign needs. This is a longer sales cycle. This is not something where, I don't know, sign a pilot today and then tomorrow we start delivering data. But the value we offer them is that if you sign with us up, let's say today, you can have data from this afternoon or tomorrow morning because there's already something up there. And the first step is so giving access and then training people how to use that data set, because not everybody is able as of today. It requires some education to use that in the most efficient way. It will probably take a bit to build the satellites. Well, not probably, it does take a bit to build the satellites, but this can be
Years, yeah.
yeah, no, not 7 years. So the first system we built, we went from whiteboard to operational in space in 11 months. Not sure we can replicate this with every single satellite, but this is kind of the timeline we're speaking about.
Yeah.
So then, in this case, for full disclosure, this was just the camera, right, on the space station. So full-blown satellite requires a little bit longer timeline, but not a whole lot. Then the second part is, okay, let's collaborate on building the systems to your needs, because there's going to be black box tasking and so on required, and we need to comply with these standards. And by the time they launch, which is not too far in the future, you have fully trained personnel on that. You know exactly how to operate these systems. It will be tailored to your needs when it comes to, let's say, the tasking aspect and so on and so forth. You will have first right of refusal over your territory plus a buffer zone and so on and so forth. And you are buying into something which will be continuously replenished. And you get more access than you actually, if you just buy, let's say, 3 satellites, then you would have 3 satellites. But it's a confederated constellation, which means you get access to, if you like, the entire constellation. So this is the value we offer to the governments, and we see a lot of traction there with European but also non-European governments.
And just before you flew here, you said that you'd just signed the contract, or you were going to sign a contract. How did that go? Yeah.
So yeah, things are good here. There's a lot of traction here. We're in the final stage of tendering processes here, and it is full-blown applications in the realm of industrial monitoring. So in infrastructure monitoring
in Riyadh, right?
Yeah, we're talking about here in the kingdom. It's about urban heat, and it's about agriculture, so food security. And just to maybe bring that back to the initial question you had, yes, it's about resilience, but also agriculture is part of resilience. It's part of food security, and it's part of, therefore, well, in the end, also defense.
Yeah.
Right. So all of these things are coming very, very close together.
Yeah, because I was just hearing in another session that 85% of the food from the UAE comes outside of country.
From the kingdom, you mean?
From the UAE.
For the UAE in this case.
So it's like I was.
Yeah. Well, it's probably similar here.
Yeah. So we need to change that. Yeah.
Yes, and there's the question about, for example, water security. So in the region here, the water reserves will not last forever. So an estimate is that it will last around next 5, maybe 7 years. And the question is, what now? Then what you do is you heavily rely on either import or desalination. If you rely on desalination, you have critical assets, which if attacked and if out of order, the land will be on its knees, and that is not what you want. So you create single points of vulnerability, and that is something you need to avoid. So there's, I think the kingdom has just, well, not just, but has announced a couple of months ago, a 20 billion fund just to look at food and water security. And that makes sense. It does make strategic sense, because you have thirsty and hungry people. That's not going to be happy people, right? Yeah. So it is looking at, let's say, resilience from all kinds of different angles. But the defense, the security, and also the predominantly civil angle of agriculture, they all belong together.
Mm-hmm. And maybe coming on to the unit economics of the whole thing, and you've been analyzing. We had our previous conversation about cost per image and the minimum viable image price, and how low can you go while still keeping gross margins healthy.
Yes.
And what levers such as imaging, volume, tasking windows for the satellites, or onboard processing, what matters most? I'm not sure if we can bring in figure 1 on this and talk about that.
Yeah, we can bring figure 1 on that. So what I like to focus on here is that there's a very big distinction between thermal data and non-thermal data. Why? Because thermal data or temperature is a continuous variable, whereas all the optical analysis we would be doing is working with non-continuous data. What does it mean? Imagine you taking a picture, a photograph of a parking lot, let's say the typical in front of Walmart example. And in the first image you see a blue car, and then 2 hours later you take another image and you see a yellow car. So what happens in between? You don't know, because it's discontinuous, right? There's no easy physical model which tells you how a blue car becomes a yellow car, right? Or maybe in between there's no car or 2 red cars. Or also whatever comes as it starts painting the cars, you know what I'm saying? That could be, right? So it could be the same car, which just be repainted. So the challenge is here that the information is just valid for a snapshot in time. And then the value massively decreases. If you look at what the satellite cost is, what the launch cost is, if you look at how many images a satellite can take in its life, you have a lower threshold for how cheap you can make an image. And you won't be able to get around that.
Yeah.
Very simple math. And the outcome of that is, and that's the reason none of the companies so far was able to commercially scale, because you can't make it cheap enough for a larger commercial sector to be interested in it. It just doesn't return the value. You are an order of magnitude off for most of the use cases. So what do? You sell to government because there's strategic value in it. And that's the reason that 80% of the market is basically a government market. Okay. Let's look at thermal. If I take an image at 10 in the morning and then at 12 at noon, take an image, basically take a measurement, I know how the temperature behaves in between. That's what we call weather models, right?
Yeah.
There's physical laws as part of the diurnal circle of the sun moving around the earth. That's something we understand quite well from last, 2,000 years, depending where you are, right?
Yeah.
And we can predict with a very, very high accuracy how the temperature is behaving. So we already have a good product, which is actually an hourly updated product globally, which is giving us pretty good predictions about, let's say, nearly factor 2 better what can be found in scientific literature as best models. And this is operational. So what does it mean? Thereby, we are breaking the link between number of satellites and amount of data you can create, and you effectively can sell. So that's not true for every single use case. For some anomaly detection, this would not be part of the model. But for a lot of the use cases, it is very, very valid. So this means that for a lot of use cases, you suddenly create a situation where the cost comes down by 2 orders of magnitude, because it's mostly about processing, not so much about how many satellites you have, right? Satellites still play a role, but for a lot of use cases, this link is now broken, which is perfect. So we will be able to compete pricing wise in a fashion where none of the other constellations, because they don't have the accuracy or they are not in the right spectrum, will have a chance to, let's say, fight back in that sense, right? Right. Even though the launch price will go to 0 because Elon decides that's, I don't know, free launch Friday, that won't matter. That won't move the needle.
Yeah.
So we speak about orders of magnitude cheaper. And for this, eventually, to your last question, things like edge processing, creating insights on board, and then having communication between satellites will become vital.
Yeah, and that's what I'm talking about, the unit economics, and then that goes into the next question, which is about scalability and your mode. And a recurring critique is that commercial satellites struggle to scale continuous coverage. And how are you breaking that paradigm through constellation design, artificial intelligence, driven interpolation? I think you've already mentioned a bit of that, or partnerships. So what are you doing in that area?
So, again, lots of questions, right? So I try to break
them down. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start with what I just alluded to. There is the ability to interpolate spatially, spectrally, and temporally between temperature data. So this gives us access to large areas, continuous coverage. So the example I like to use is, imagine Earth observation as the 90s music industry today. So you want to listen to your favorite song, but you need to buy the entire album, right? So not just the tiny part innocent, but the entire sea around it. Yeah, it's expensive and so on. So and we're moving from this 90s music industry, moving to, not via Napster necessarily, but to Spotify. You listen to what you want, it's subscription based, and you only listen to what you want and nothing else. And ideally there's no commercials, right? In between. And that is where the industry, I think, needs to go to. And we're ideally set up to become that player. We're not there today, but we're moving very strongly in this direction. We also get the market feedback that this is what is wanted. I think when it comes to building these models, building a thermal twin, building a health monitor of the planet, there's not going to be only one data set which plays a role, right? So there's going to be correlation between data sets, but right now we're focusing on one of the key missing data sets, which is, as I said, the activity layer. And we eventually need to merge that with more geometry information, with other information, with biophysical information to get a more complete picture. So that is the vision. And for this vision to come true and to be scalable, AI plays a defining role, because you will have a lot of input parameters which you need to correlate with each other. You need to sanity check and so on and so forth to build a Google Earth on steroids in a way, which gives you a real-time image of the health of the entire planet. And just to speak about a few use cases there, just to paint a picture. So I already mentioned a couple of use cases. So now imagine you have a continuous information. You have continuous information about what's the emission in industry, in a certain industry. So if you know what's in that building, and we've actually seen that with a steel mill, you can read the production level out of that thermal emission, because the production level goes down, then it's less emission, right?
Yeah.
So that is interesting, right?
Yeah.
So now assume you would apply this to, you can apply this to all kinds of industries. So you can apply it to commodity industries, commodity producing industries, and you might have a hunch of how the market is moving. That's an important information. You might apply this to, let's say, military relevant industries. So let's say production level of drones, other things. So might also be an interesting information to have.
Yes, definitely.
So now let's look, for example, at oil pipelines, right? Oil pipelines, well, there's flux. The flux is a function of pressure. The pressure gives you a certain temperature. So if you read the temperature, you know the diameter plus the input temperature, you know how much oil is going through a pipeline. So you can basically X-ray pipelines. That again only is, you can only do this if you have this activity layer. So, but imagine now you suddenly have a transparent planet in that sense, where you know how these fluxes are, what the industry is doing, how much bananas are grown in this region, how much kiwis are grown in this region, how the hops harvest is going to be in September because of early signs of stress, how like all of these things are coming together. This will be a very different basis for taking decisions. And this is exactly what we're striving for. But this can only be achieved if we have the right data set, because otherwise it's shit in, shit out. Right? So you have a reliable data set. Actually, then you fuse different data sets and you put this under the umbrella of an AI, which is actually understanding, correlating the information which are provided. And this gives you an extremely powerful tool you can query. And my best estimate is that within the next decade, we will have such a tool. And we will think back and like, how could we have ever lived without such a tool?
Exactly, because it will just make things so much transparent. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Now, going on to your product highlights for non-specialists, because a lot of people here are not a physicist like yourself,
Which is usually good. If we're all physicists, humankind would be extinct.
what should they care about? Revisiting time, ground sampling, distance, DSD, or noise equivalent delta temperature, or roughly 30 millikelvin, or a level 2 land surface temperature uncertainty, or less than 2 Kelvin. So what's actionable? How's that turn into actionable data that you can actually use?
Yeah. Okay. So let's say one step back. In the end, what we need to do as an industry is you're not thinking about, if you look at Google Maps or the little blue dot which tells you where you are, you're not thinking about, wow, general relativity made this possible, or GPS satellites or something. Like, you just follow the blue dot.
Yes, exactly.
So it's very intuitive. This is not where we are with Earth observation today, right? You might not need general relativity to understand it, but it's still highly complex, and just mention a couple of the terms. So as an industry, we need to move to a completely intuitive use of that data. People not even knowing they use that data, right? So if you query something like, hey, how can I optimize my irrigation in my garden because I'm living in the kingdom and there's water is expensive and so on and so forth, It should give you an idea of like, hey, you can reduce irrigation by 12%, do 2 hours later, and then also maybe how can I optimize energy in my home, and then looks at the rooftop of your the AI looks at the rooftop of the energy emission for the rooftop, and gives you a personalized, customized recommendation for how you can improve your living standard, like how you use less, probably not heating, less cooling, at least in the kingdom, and how you can optimize water resources and so on and so forth. So,
or maybe even automating that even further, so the human isn't even in the loop. It's machine to machine.
Yeah, you could even say, hey, please optimize my smart irrigation system in the garden. And then it would require a data source such as the one we would be providing. And ideally that is something which then translate into actions for that person, right? Or let's say you want to choose the way through the street, and it's automatically through the city, automatically choosing that way, which is least in the least way damaging your health because you're not moving through smog areas and so on and so forth. Again, this is a function of temperature, is a function of a lot of parameters, atmospheric conditions, and so on. So the underlying so the question was, what should people care about?
Yes.
And all of these recommendations will have an impact on your life. So they need to be reliable, right? You need to trust that if I do this, I get the result I want.
Yes.
And I'm not ending up in the smoggiest part of the town, and I'm not have a skyrocketing cooling bill, electricity bill, or whatever. So, and from that point of view, the most important parameter is the accuracy. It is not the GSD, the ground sampling distance. It is not the frequency. They all play a role too. But reliability is closest correlated to accuracy and precision. And obviously, yes, I'm slightly biased because that's what we've been aiming for from day one, right? To have the highest accuracy and precision.
Yes.
But for a good reason, for exactly that reason, because you need to trust the results in the end. And without trust, all of this doesn't matter.
Good. Now bringing artificial intelligence into the loop, we've been hearing all about it here in the FII. Where are you using artificial intelligence today? Downscaling and sharpening imagery, cloud gap filling or anomaly detection, which you've already talked about. What's on the roadmap towards AI-assisted tasking and automated alerts, and the impact this could all have on the quality of information and actionable tasks for the customer?
I think the faster question to answer would be, where are you not using AI? Right? Because we're actually using it pretty much on every single step. However, it is AI, again, which ideally doesn't hallucinate, because it's about reliability, exactly reliability. So we make sure that we use the right type of algorithm, the right type of approaches to achieve that, right? So we would probably, at this point in time, wouldn't really ask ChatGPT to do the data assessment. Not yet, maybe in the future. So exactly. So yeah, we use it from design processes. We use it in our mission planning. And just there, we're also exploring for some quantum algorithms there. So I would say we run to the bleeding edge. What we're doing, we're using it when it comes to optimization problems. For example, that's a typical problem you will have when you have to control a large and larger constellation. We use it in data processing. You mentioned clouds, right? There's also the estimation of emissivity. There's a lot of things you can use it in. I would say I would be very surprised if there are a lot of steps in our existing value chain where AI is not already playing a role. And it will play a stronger role going in the future. But we need to make sure that we understand what AI is doing, at least in the initial phase, to guarantee that reliability. So we still do certain manual tasks at the moment that we stochastically look at certain images and do a sanity check, a quality check. And as we go forward, more and more of this can be transferred to AI. But right now, we're relying on the internal experts to do that and training AI models to, let's say, tag alongside.
In figure 2, you can see Svalbard and what thermal reveals which optical cannot. This is one of constellr's most striking image with intelligence examples. You're looking at Svalbard in the Arctic. The image on the right is what you would see with a normal satellite, just snow and rock. But the thermal image on the left shows the real story. warmer areas in orange, and red and colder stable zones in blue. Those warm patches indicate permafrost that's beginning to destabilize. That's critical because even small temperature shifts can trigger landslides, infrastructure damage, and carbon release. So this isn't just a pretty picture, it's a temperature map that tells governments exactly where climate risk is emerging long before it becomes visible. But now going to latency versus accuracy, the trade-offs, and this is one that seems to be a big issue with, especially where you want to gain accuracy for time-critical workflows such as heat stress alerts or utility load balancing. What are you delivering today, and what do you want to be doing by 2027?
Yes. So we're already operational in most of the use cases you have mentioned. So that is already existing. However, we're not achieving the latency targets we have for 2027 right now, right? But we do see a week-to-week improvement in terms of tasking efficiency and also latency and so on and so forth.
Is that because it's done on board in up in space? Or?
It is because our internal workflows are improving for week to week. So I think we have a good grasp of the system by now. It's been flying for 10 months. But we're still learning every day is the truth. So initially we took a few images a day. Now we're in the 20th of images per day. We try to achieve about 60 to 100 images or scenes, not images, sorry, scenes, recordings per day by the end of the year. Scene would be, so we have a two-dimensional footprint of the detector on the ground. And a scene would be this footprint and then moving the satellite in a certain direction for a certain amount of time. So could be elongated. Right, so strips, if you like, imaging strips or measurement strips. So where do you want to be 2027? So by 2027, we're about to launch our next gen.
Figure 3, thermal intelligence landscape, resolution versus frequency across providers. This chart shows how far ahead constellr already is in thermal imaging and how their capability continues to step up. Today, they are already the most accurate operational thermal player. The next evolution of their system pushes them even further. You can see the jump here, moving up in frequency and to the right in resolution. That shift enables much richer intelligence. It means smaller features become visible and they can track change far more reliably over time. In 2027, constellr will launch another satellite that increases revisit frequency. The major resolution improvement comes with constellr's next generation system launching in 2028.
By 2027, I would assume that, no, actually not just would assume, I have conviction that we have about half a dozen contracts in the, let's say, ISR as a service regime. So intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance as a service. And this is what we're offering in the end, because, well, I actually believe that's already the case in 2026. And we have placed ourselves as the dominant provider of thermal intelligence, not only in Europe, but globally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now moving to a section around defense and sovereignty, which has been a pivot for you this last year in March when Donald Trump decided to cut off intelligence to the rest of the world, or not to the world, to his allies here in Europe, or not here, but in Europe. We've seen the United States National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, thermal infrared contracts, and Japan's IHI Corporation collaborate with SatView on sovereign capability. What are you learning from engaging with European and international governments on requirements, accreditations, and taskings that they need from the defense side angle?
Yes. So again, so first of all, quickly about the pivot, right? So we initially did not set out to build a constellation for defense, and you know that, right?
Yes, I do.
That is something which was, and a pivot for me would be completely neglecting everything else. No, but we have an additional business unit which is dealing with defense.
Yes.
Right. So we are inherently dual use, if you like that word or not. And what we see is what resonates quite well is that there's short-term challenges which need to be overcome around sovereignty, resilience, and they're usually rooted in the security and defense area. But the uniqueness of the system is that it doesn't just help with those things, because the big fight, and there's basically nobody who denies that, will be climate change. And it doesn't matter what a Putin does, and it doesn't matter. This won't go away. We might ignore it for now because we have bigger troubles, but it won't go away.
Exactly. Climate change is here to stay forever.
It is here to stay, and we need to deal with it if we like it or not.
Yeah.
And usually, if you're in panic mode and things are difficult, then you might lack long-term thinking. And that is just human. It's completely normal. So, but we are striving, and we are implementing a system which helps you in times of crisis, solving these challenges, supporting you in these challenges, but also solves the bigger challenges. So it's not just space debris by the time the war's over. And you have achieved your objectives, and maybe everybody's friends again, and there's a lot of hugs on the governmental level, like if this ever comes, I don't know. But it helps you to solve the underlying problem as well. So you can fundamentally use it in the civil as well as the non-civil sector, building resilience for your population. So this is something which resonates quite well. For me, the pivot was a struggle, I must confess. It was not easy. Part of the reason I left my previous job was that I want to have less work in defense. But on the other hand, I need to realize, I just came back from Ukraine a couple of weeks ago. I had to realize that the privilege of being a pacifist is something we might not have today. But in order for our kids, and your kids are young too, absolutely right, to have this privilege again, we need to stand together right now and do the right thing. And that is, unfortunately, not being a pacifist. It took me a moment, maybe there's smarter people, probably more agile. It took me a moment to realize that, but I'm now fully leaning in. And I am of the conviction that we need to do that. So this is a bit about the pivot in general.
Yeah, definitely.
What we see from nations, what they ask us about, is very much aligned with what I alluded earlier to, about, hey, we need to have our own sovereign systems. But the challenge is that space stays relatively expensive. And we now have the need, there's an urgency to solve this problem in a time span where, quite frankly, large European primes can't solve it. It's simply not in their DNA.
Yeah.
They simply can't do it. So this is the opportunity to mint, I would call, neo-primes, to look at the existing ecosystem, because, let's say, resilience, okay, I would say, and I hope this is not sounding too cliche, but I believe that resilience in space starts with diversity on the ground.
Yes.
And if you rely on a single company which has a track record on not delivering in time and budget to solve the problem, which needs to be delivered in time and budget, most important, in time, that is not a good strategy.
Yeah.
So you need to multi-source, you need to diversify. And this is, I think, where we as a startup, as a young company, have a very good opportunity to become one of the relevant primes in the future. And it's not just true for us, it's true for others too. And it's the European opportunity to build an ecosystem which matters. But for that, you need to do what on the surface might seem a risky move, trusting companies which have not handled 100 or 200 or 500 or $1 billion projects, and trusting these companies to deliver fast. But the big advantage we have is with track record. It's not something on a PowerPoint, it is actually operational in space. And we do see that the understanding of that being something actually less risky in the end, because it means, oh, we had a lot more time, we can do a lot more, we get access tomorrow, and so on and so forth, that these things seem to dawn also at the decision maker level. And we're fighting for this every day.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point around decision levels that they are seeing that, and I've seen this with ISI and other assets. Everybody in Europe is diving to get their own satellite, not everybody can have it. We need to have hubs of specialism within Europe, because we have to share within Europe and collaborate within Europe. And I think that's a very strong point, yeah. Now coming to what may be a little bit sensitive on the operational relevance, without disclosing anything sensitive, obviously, because we know that what you're doing in Ukraine is different.
Yes.
What publicly discussable defense use cases make the strongest case for thermal imagery from counter uncrewed aerial systems, in other words, drones, because they also have a thermal footprint and you can see where their launch sites are, camouflage and decoy discrimination, logistics or energy infrastructure monitoring, through to post-strike battle damage assessment, which is also probably a very big issue going forward.
It's a very good question. I'll answer on a high level, and because I'm not allowed and cannot and will not disclose certain information. It is operational used in various ways. Let me come back to maybe more general view. So we said it's an activity layer. So I'd like to give you a bit of without going into the detail of a certain use case, giving you a little bit of an idea of what the areas of use cases are. So first of all, thermal imagery or thermal intelligence gives you the same kind of information, the same type of information at day as well as at night, right? Because we're not depending on solar emission, on solar rays being reflected from whatever surface there is. We're completely independent of that, right? That is true for the long wave infrared. It's not true for the mid wave infrared, right? But for long wave infrared, where we are, that is the case. So basically, it doesn't matter. The daytime doesn't matter. And if you look at certain operations in war zones, daytime does matter. It does matter big time, especially when you go from day to night and night to day. Transition doesn't matter for us. So I would say that is one area of application which is interesting, and there are quite a lot of use cases there. Then on the activity monitoring side, I would call this as patterns of life. So you see there's certain patterns over time, and you're interested in when these patterns are changing, because it means that maybe strategy is changing, activity type is changing. So that is something which is really interesting, and could be in the maritime space. It could be at, let's say, contact zones, but it could be also in the industrial area. Another thing is that we had this earlier with the slightly, I always think it's a slightly ridiculous example, but actually does exist, the inflatable tanks. I think one important aspect is that sometimes you want someone else not to see what you're doing, ideally all the time.
Yeah.
But it could be camouflage, it could be submerged, it could be underground, whatever. So all of these activities have certain footprints. To give you one example, which is more relevant, let's say on the security side, less on the defense side, is, let's say you have airstrips in the jungle and you don't want people to know where these airstrips are. So what you usually do is you put leaves of these or branches and so on. So in the visual image, it looks exactly the same. However, these plants are not living anymore. So they have a very different evapotranspiration signal, very different thermal signal, because they can't cool themselves anymore. So if you look at a thermal image of this region, you see hot spots. And these hot spots, if they look like landing strips, well, they are landing strips. So it helps you to detect camouflage operation. It helps you to detect underground activity. So whenever you expel some kind of energy,
And the human body expels a lot of energy.
exactly, it does. We don't have the resolution level yet to look at single humans, right? But as soon as you have some type of energy which is released, you see a thermal footprint. And if this thermal footprint changes, means the activity changes. So it is very hard to camouflage from something if you want to be somehow active. There's, in fact, no known object in the universe which doesn't have a thermal signature, because there's nothing at 0 Kelvin.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, because there's a lot of UGVs on the Ukrainian battlefield, unmanned ground vehicles. They're electric, so you can't hear them, but there's always a thermal footprint.
Exactly. And the same for, let's say, stealth jets and other things, right? They always have a thermal footprint.
Yeah, exactly. Now, well, building a little bit on that, you talked about underground and subsurface detection. Listeners often ask whether thermal imagery can reveal underground movement or underwater pipes. What are the physics-imposed limits from orbit, and where can thermal still provide indirect cues such as heat plumes, shoreline anomalies, or night-type signatures? Because day or night doesn't matter, right? Yeah.
So it depends if you look at static or at timelines, or static imagery or timelines. But just giving you a bit of the physicist view on this, right? So imagine you have something underground which is made of a different material than, let's say, sand or soil or whatever you have around.
Yeah.
So this will heat up in a different way and cool down a different way. Okay. So you can detect to a certain degree underground structures. Full stop. You can do this, right? Obviously, the further underground it is, the more difficult it becomes.
Of course, yeah.
Yes. Then, if you, let's say, have holes underground which are covered, you will see again a different thermal inertia, so a different heating cooling behavior than if these holes are not there. The amount of water which can be stored in soil above these chambers is different. So again, here you can see a difference.
It gives it away on the surface, even though you don't even need to go down to see that happen.
Exactly. So there are quite some things we still need to test and experiment, but some things we've already seen are working, and that's quite interesting. The amount of the depth of information you can get, the three-dimensional depth of information you can get from thermal imaging is mind-blowing. And we've had several situations where we saw a signal and we first had to sit down and really think what we're seeing, because we're so blown away by what we could suddenly, we had no clue what it is. To give you one example, I think I can share that, is that when you look at ships moving through, let's say, a lake, sea, whatever it is, you see upwelling behind the ship. So different layers of water have different temperature. If a ship passes them, it's mixing these layers. So you see thermal traces of ships.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So not only do you see the ship itself, where it is right now, but you see where it has been. And
also all the way, so several kilometers behind that.
Yes. It depends, the length of the strip of let's say, the thermal trace depends on the waves, wind, let's say weather conditions. But we've seen several kilometers in length of these strips. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting, especially when you're looking at tactics. But now switching gears to something completely different, where we are here now, we're in Saudi Arabia,
Yes.
and also looking at global applications. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, you've been doing pilots and been partnering with people here. Your Saudi presentation highlights irrigation efficiencies, desertification monitoring. What have you learned from pilot projects in the kingdom? For example, data integration with local analytics partners, metrics ministries are caring about, like water saved or degrees cooled, which is here obviously an issue in the summer, and potential to scale across regions like NEOM and Figure 4 shows urban cooling insights, city-scale heat mapping and intervention planning. It shows the results of intervening to make cooling dramatically more efficient.
So on a more general note, people are extremely cooperative here. So they really want to get you here. Not only just that they're obviously all very hospitable, but they are interested in engaging with the technology. They have very open minds.
The first time I was here in 2016, I think, the first FII. They were just very open, supportive as well. Their infrastructure here to support new startups.
And they're not afraid to do experiments and to test. And that is something which I wish we had a little bit more of a mindset in Europe. And then when they execute fast. And also the level of access to decision makers is astounding. So I can just say for the 72 hours, we met so many decision makers at the highest level, which is uncommon, would be very uncommon in Europe, but is very helpful here. So I think they see, so first of all, what I very much appreciate is they have a vision, they know where they're going. They think not just to the next election as we would in Europe, but they think longer term, and that is something which is extremely helpful to align. And this might change this vision, right? NEO might become a little smaller, or other things might become a little bigger, but in general, there's a certain way they're moving, and that is something I'm impressed by.
Yeah, I'm actually astounded by how it's moved between 2016 and today. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah,
I was here the last time 2 years ago, and even in that short amount of time, it moved quite a bit. So with that in mind, they are looking at short-term challenges, but also looking at long-term challenges. And these long-term challenges are around water and food security. So what we're seeing is not only interest in security and defense, but really long-term visions like, hey, how can we optimize water usage? How can we optimize the living, our urban population, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I also very, very much value here, is that they look into the long term. They look for really impactful stuff, right?
Exactly.
So moving maybe on to urban heat, return on investment, using Riyadh as an example.
Yes.
Uh, how do you quantify the benefits of interventions such as trees, parks, reflective roofs, or shady corridors? Um, for example, city blocks cooled per dollar invested, energy savings, or public health indicators.
So there's a vast scientific body on the impact of heat on human health. And a subset of that is around human productivity, economic productivity. So there's, for example, an interesting article from the Rockefeller Foundation where they break it down and give you order of magnitude. So every degree in heating per year, per capita, reduces the above a certain threshold, right? So if you go from 2 to 3, probably not. But if you go from 34 to 35, probably yes. Reduces the economic productivity on the global average by around $1,000, right? So this means that economic losses due to urban heat will very likely cross the $1 trillion mark in 2030, 2031.
Wow.
So it is, I would say, not a small problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a massive challenge. So this is just one way to quantify it. And
It's not just here, it's also in Europe as well, right?
yeah. So Europe's actually the most affected continent by global warming. We're way past the 2 degrees already. Like on the global average, we're still at like 1.5, 1.6, but Europe has been racing past the 2 digits earlier. So we should care about that.
Yeah.
Having lived in Australia for some time, I can definitely attest to heat affecting my productivity as a student. Other things affected it too. Yes, I need to confess to that, but heat did play its role. So we played, for example, we worked with a city planner in India, just to give one example, and I think it's public domain. And the city planner built a alternative sustainable city 20 kilometers west of Jaipur in the district of Rajasthan.
Okay.
Beautiful area, very desert.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what you could see by just applying, not applying a lot of energy or anything, well, applying a lot of mental energy, but not applying a lot of, like, let's say, irrigation, under these other techniques, but really sustainable techniques with the resources he had. He built a city which is about 7 degrees cooler than Jaipur, which is only 20 kilometers further. So the city is a lot greener and so on and so forth. So if
You got to appreciate, maybe just compare geographics. Jaipur is on the edge of a huge desert going west. Yeah,
absolutely. I could say it's
true to Jaisalmer is an incredible place, but yes,
it's also a massive place. It has a massive population density. So he lived there, and then at some point wanted to change things, and had the means to change things. And I just can lift my hat to like the effort he put in there. But we could scientifically prove that there's this temperature difference. Now, if you multiply this by the population density in the area of Jaipur, the economic effect is astounding. And if you now look at a region like the kingdom, yes, surely they should care. So what we can do is we can look at the energy efficiency on a single building level for every building on the planet. Obviously, that's including the kingdom. So the effect of urban heat islands is massively underestimated in, let's say, the public perception. And it is a problem which will only it will not go away. It will only move in one direction. So we've been very happy to see there's a large interest in the kingdom to solve these things and to solve it the right way. Because just planting trees and trying to look at survival rate of these trees after 5 years is, if it's done by volunteers, around 2%. That is not the solution, right? So you need to have a strategy and implementation plan. And what we're offering is exactly quantifying these mitigation methods.
great. Now going to the other side of that, which is industrial monitoring, and beyond agriculture and cities, where do you see traction in refineries, district cooling plants, and pipeline integrity monitoring? Where, for example, you got leaks in pipes, which you can detect through anomalies, and you alluded to a bit about flux, about how much throughput goes through the pipe, so you also can measure leaks, even small ones. Yeah.
Yes.
Figure 5a, date palm health monitor, early detection of water stress and productivity loss. This figure shows the data palm monitor. What it shows is thermal data highlighting crop stress, irrigation efficiency, and before and after improvements in water usage and yield. Figure 5b, road infrastructure heat risk. This figure shows preventative maintenance monitoring. It uses temperature patterns to detect early signs of road degradation, overheating segments, and emerging potholes long before they become visible, enabling cities to prioritize repairs and reduce maintenance costs.
So I cannot tell you about the size of the leaks because this is an experiment we need to conduct, but the physics there is very clear what you can do. And I think this has, again, depending who you are as a stakeholder, it has different meaning. So, for example, if you would be the Canadian government and you're looking at pipelines, hypothetically, if you're looking at pipelines in Canada, then there's a legislation which tells the owner of this pipelines you need to fix anything within 48 hours, right? So there's also a question about latency and so on and so forth, right? So, but this is about not having whatever's in those pipelines go into the soil. So that is one thing.
So environmental
impact, exactly. But you can also see it from a different perspective. You might be I heard there are some companies dealing with oil, also in the kingdom, and you might want to be one of these companies, and you can have sensors for your own pipelines, but maybe you're interested of how much is going through other pipelines which you don't own or don't operate. Right. So there's also the idea of market intelligence there. So this is interesting. And also if you're trading, right, this could be interesting.
Yeah.
And it's the same for, let's say, all these parts of what I would claim critical industrial infrastructure. Yes, it could be energy grids, but it could also be data centers. If we look at the energy which is going to data centers, that is very interesting. Then a lot of the industrial sites which are semi-critical are unmanned. There's no one there.
Yeah.
So how do you have, we had discussions here with companies which have literally thousands of assets across the globe. How do you manage all of those? And often the answer is, well, we call someone and says, hey, Frank, what's happening? Can you just go there? There's something seems off. Like, can you have a look? And then Frank goes and comes like, all good. Oh, okay, thank you. And then fine, right? Yeah. It's still on the level, or you try to fly drones and so on. But then the question is, if you fly a drone and now suddenly you fly at a different time of day, or it's slightly higher, slightly lower. So how do you compare these measurements again? So how do you create a consistent trace of uniform intelligence about this?
Yeah.
And the answer is, it's tough. You can't. If you have a system which is doing the same measurements all around the globe, it makes things a lot easier. And this is usually the angle where we see that there's conviction of those people then using respective assets from space.
Good. Okay, great. And then finally looking ahead and some reflections on trends, on future trends and so on. What's next for constellr? Constellation size to achieve daily revisits? What sort of size are you thinking of? Edge and onboard processing, fusion with public missions such as ESA's LSTM and CNES and ISRO's Trishna, which you mentioned before. And how do you see image price and throughput curves evolving?
So these are all very technical questions. I would like to take a step back and look at the larger strategies. And I said earlier that this is the time where we will mint neoprimes.
Yeah.
So our ambition is to become one of these neoprimes in Europe with a very strong domain focus on initially thermal and the other things on the horizon, right? And yes, the performance will be better. We're going to use edge computing and there's like intersatellite terminals and all these things. This is more the how we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Right? How we're going to solve certain problems. But what we want to do is we want to become the central player in Europe and ideally globally to, let's say, the central thermal intelligence player for now. So we'll build consortia and we'll announce something quite interesting in a few days from now. We will consortia to make that happen.
Okay.
And that's the one thing. So on the other hand, yes, there's the number of satellites and so on and so forth. the number of satellites in the end will be enough to, let's say, satisfy a global demand. I think would actually be more than enough initially, because there's so much push towards sovereignty or one constellation, that even with a federated constellation concept as we have that, so the ISR as a service would probably, let's say, have overcapacity in space relatively soon, in the next 3 to 5 years. And then the interesting question for me is, how can we use that overcapacity to also fulfill the long-term needs of those countries which might not be able to chip into these constellations? So that is an interesting way. And then commercially, the goal needs to be to get the unit economics to where they need to be to really scale that commercially. So it's all going towards this digital twin, right, in the end, and then interpolation and all these things, the nifty things we need to do to make that happen. But the goal needs to be that we build the system, the transparent planet, and to the benefit of every single human on that planet. So we go from, yes, we start B2G, we do a lot of B2B, but in the end, everybody on this planet should be helped by that.
Great, yeah. And then finally, the last real question for viewers who want to, or listeners who want to get a better understanding of thermal intelligence and planetary resilience and where it's heading. Are there some books, 2 or 3 books that you could recommend to read on this?
Should we ever write a book about this, then I would recommend them. Otherwise, there's unfortunately there is a lot of the let's say body of just publications on this is all in the scientific domain, right? It has been known since the 70s, and since the 70s we've got thermal sensors in space. So there's a lot of stuff which is existing there, but I wouldn't know of a single encyclopedia of thermal intelligence. As I know, maybe you have found something. I find it difficult.
Yeah, not an encyclopedia, maybe a dummy's guide to
yes, to become a thermal intelligence expert 21 days. Yeah, maybe we need to write that. So
it could be our next book, yeah?
exactly. So let's do that. Yeah.
All right then. Yeah. Thank you very much, Max, for coming here, and I look forward to hearing what you're doing and your upcoming success, probably. And you're talking about a consortium that you're just about to launch, yeah?
Exactly. Yeah. And Alan, always a pleasure. Yeah. Thank you for supporting us over the last years. And it is interesting times we're living in, and I'm quite happy that we're living in them.
Yeah. Same here, yeah. Great.
Perfect.
If you're an LP interested in learning about space tech, defense tech, and security, including cybersecurity investment opportunities, let's chat.